My name is Maria, and I'd like to tell you about something that happened to me. This is the story of how I learned to build a life without waiting for applause. That would never come how I graduated college alone, found my voice in a world that had overlooked me, and eventually created something meaningful from all the quiet moments no one else witnessed. I sent out the invitations 3 weeks in advance, one to the house address and one by email just in case. I even triple-checked that the ceremony wouldn't overlap with any holidays or big family events. I knew Caleb's birthday fell on the same weekend, but I figured they could come for one day. Just one. The reply came sooner than I expected. It was a text. My father didn't bother with punctuation. That's Caleb's birthday. We can't make it. Hope it goes well. I stared at it for a long time. Then I reread it as if tone might change the second time around. I imagined him typing it, maybe. Even glancing at my mother while he hit send, and both of them agreeing it was reasonable. I didn't answer, not that night, not the next. I kept thinking maybe Mom would follow up with something gentler. Maybe Caleb would say, "I don't mind going to her graduation." But no other messages came. Instead, I checked the mail every afternoon, with a ridiculous hope that a card would show up late, that maybe they were trying to surprise me, that maybe they were different this time. It stayed empty. On campus, everyone was buzzing about their families flying in. Mom's asking what color corsages to wear, Dad's buying dinner reservations. I stayed quiet. I printed my cap and gown confirmation, laid it on my desk, smoothed the crease with my hand. I folded it again and slid it into a drawer under a stack of grocery receipts and unpaid bills. Then I turned off my phone for the night because if they weren't coming, I needed to decide whether I still would. The morning of graduation was colder than I expected. I wrapped the school-issued robe tight around me as I stood in the check-in line, surrounded by chatter, perfume, and proud families taking blurry photos. I didn't bring anyone. I told my roommates I'd meet them there. I didn't want the moment where someone asked, "Where's your family?" And I had to lie with a half smile. Rows of folding chairs lined the field. Giant white tents flapped above the crowd. People held signs, cameras, noisemakers. One girl's parents had her name spelled out in glitter on poster board. Another was passing out cupcakes with her face printed on them. I found my seat in the second row, reserved for graduates. With honors. My name was printed on a card, Sharpie scribbled for the announcer to read. I kept it in my hand like something I wasn't sure how to hold. When it was my turn, I stood. Walked up the steps. The dean smiled and said my name. I heard light applause. Polite and generic. Nothing personal. No one shouted. No one stood. I shook her hand. Posed for a photo, turned and walked down the steps. It was over in less than 15 seconds. Back in my seat, I looked out across the audience. There were empty spots in the far back, maybe for people who couldn't make it on time. Or maybe just space that was never claimed. I imagined just for a moment my father standing there in a pressed blazer, arms crossed, my mother waving. Caleb laughing and handing me a card with a sarcastic joke written inside. But when I blinked, it was still just strangers holding phones. The speech started. I folded the name card in half and slipped it into my pocket. When I was 7, Caleb got a trampoline for his birthday, not a small one, either the kind with netting, padding. A ladder. We spent the whole weekend jumping while cousins and neighbors crowded the backyard. There were banners, a cake shaped like a football, and a magician who made balloon animals. 2 months later, on my birthday, I got a pink t-shirt and a grocery store cupcake with a single candle. Mom said, "We'll do something bigger next year," but we never did. Caleb's name always filled the house, his test scores on the fridge, his basketball schedule posted on the pantry door. When he got a B in chemistry, Dad mailed the teacher to argue the grade. When I got into advanced math a year early, no one mentioned it at dinner. By the time I hit high school, I stopped sharing news. I'd leave certificates in my backpack or toss them in the bottom drawer. When the Boo acceptance letter came, I opened it in the kitchen. Shaking, I told them at breakfast. Dad blinked. Boston. Huh? That's not cheap. Mom nodded without looking up from her coffee later that day. Caleb got a parking ticket dismissed, and they talked about it for an hour dot, so I learned not to ask. Not to hope, not to expect anything beyond what I could do for myself. I got a job at 16, started saving for books and travel when my laptop broke junior year. I used campus library computers instead of calling home. They'd always told me I was the easy one, the one who didn't cause trouble, who didn't need hand-holding. They never asked what that kind of silence costs, and so, when the graduation crowd faded and the field emptied out, I walked home alone, already knowing how to carry what wasn't given. My first semester at Boo, I worked 20 hours a week shelving books at the library and another 15 waitressing weekend brunches in the South End. I took notes during lectures, then rewrote them on the bus ride home. Sometimes I ate dry ramen in my dorm while reviewing flashcards. Other nights, I'd skip dinner and just sleep. I didn't mind the work. What wore me down was how invisible it felt. No one from home ever asked how I was managing. There were no care packages. No quick proud of you texts. Caleb once posted a blurry photo of himself holding a fish on Instagram and got a dozen comments from my parents. I posted a photo when I made the dean's list. Not a word. I didn't call. I told myself I was too busy. Truth was, I wasn't sure what to say. Hi. I haven't eaten a hot meal in 3 days. Also, I aced my statistics midterm. Would they even care about the second part if they didn't flinch at the first? I bought myself a small line notebook from the campus bookstore, on the cover in block letters. I wrote, "What they don't know, I've survived." Inside, I logged everything. They never saw the broken heater in my apartment freshman year. The professor who told me I wrote like someone twice my age. The time I gave my last $10 to a girl in my dorm who'd been crying outside the laundry room. The hours I spent relearning coding just to land a paid internship by junior year. I was tutoring underclassmen and leading Saturday workshops. The stipend helped, so did the validation. Still, every time I reached a new milestone, I'd glance at my phone like maybe this time someone would reach out. Maybe Caleb would say, "That's actually impressive." Maybe Mom would ask, "Are you taking care of yourself?" But the screen stayed quiet, so I started answering my own questions. Cheering in my own head, documenting the victories no one else witnessed. And by the time senior year rolled around, I'd stopped wondering whether they'd ever notice. I already knew how to keep going without applause after graduation. I packed my life into 2 suitcases and moved to Seattle. I'd accepted a contract analyst position with a nonprofit that used data to track public education disparities. It didn't pay much, but the work felt clean, quiet, necessary, honest. My apartment was a converted basement with crooked floors and no natural light, but it was mine. No one knew me there. No one expected anything. I biked to work in the drizzle, organized spreadsheets by day, took long walks by night. I read novels I couldn't afford in college and tried recipes that didn't start with boiling water. No one called. I didn't either. My co-workers were kind. One of them, Mira, brought me homemade muffins on a Thursday and said, "You don't talk much, but you're sharp." I smiled. It was the closest thing to a compliment I'd received in months, weeks past. I made a habit of walking to the Fremont Bridge at sunset and watching the boats drift underneath. There was something about the motion, slow and steady, that soothed me. Then one night, my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. "Mom, just a text. Thinking of you." That was it. No question, no update. No mention of graduation or the job or the fact that they'd missed the moment I'd worked for years. For just those 3 words, I stared at the screen for a long time. My thumbs hovered. I typed, "Thanks. Hope you're doing well." Paused, backspace, typed again. I'm in Seattle now, working. Learning to breathe. Paused again. Finally, I deleted it all because what was I supposed to say? That I'd stopped expecting them to show up, that I still woke up sometimes thinking I dreamed the graduation because it had happened so fast and so alone. That I didn't know how to carry both love and distance in the same chest. Instead, I powered off the phone and placed it face down on the kitchen counter. I opened my laptop and began drafting a fellowship application for a National Tech for Equity program. It asked for an essay about a time I overcame structural barriers. I didn't write about them. I didn't need to. I just told the truth, my version, the quiet one. And as I pressed send, I didn't even wonder if they'd be proud. A month after I submitted the fellowship application, I got an email with the subject line, "Congratulations, Maria Mora. You've been selected." I read it twice before it sank in. They'd chosen 5 of us from hundreds of applicants. We'd receive funding, mentorship, and a platform to present our work nationally. I'd pitched a project that used public school data to map underfunded communities, and they believed in it. Part of the fellowship included a press release. Just a simple feature on the organization's website, my photo, a short write-up. I didn't think much of it, but someone shared it, then someone else. A reporter from a local Seattle tech magazine reached out for an interview. I almost said no, but the editor wrote back personally, "Your story matters, especially the parts you think are too quiet to be important." So I sat down with her one rainy morning and answered her questions about working through school, about choosing purpose over prestige, about not having anyone in the stands when I walked the stage. The article came out 2 weeks later. The title, "Quiet Power, Maria Mora's Path to Purpose." I didn't even know it had gone viral until Mira burst into my office, phone in hand. "You're on my feed," she grinned, "and you look fierce, old classmates." Commented, a former professor emailed, "You were always going to change something. I'm glad the world sees it now." Then came the messages I hadn't expected. A voicemail from my mother, just breathing. Then, "We saw the article, you should have. Told us, we're proud." A text from Caleb, "Damn, you're kind of a big deal, huh?" I didn't answer either. The calls kept coming, unanswered. I let them pile up like snow outside a door I no longer opened. Instead, I printed the article, taped it above my desk, folded the emails into a new folder labeled Proof, and when I walked into my next strategy meeting, laptop in hand, a fresh idea ready on my tongue, I felt steady. Not angry, not sad, just calm. The message from Caleb came in late, just past midnight. "Guess you finally made it. Want a medal?" No punctuation, no warmth. Just a familiar brush of sarcasm dressed up as brotherly banter. I stared at it for a while, unsure if I felt anything at all. Then I opened the Notes app. I started typing. "I didn't ask for a medal. I asked for you to come to my graduation. I asked for someone to see me without needing a headline. I asked to matter when there wasn't anything impressive to point to. I wanted you to care before the internet did." I kept writing. "Do you even remember the year I sent money home when the water heater broke?" Mom said. "You're such a help." And that was it. No thanks, no question about how I was managing. I was eating noodles and skipping rent. But sure, Caleb needed more help. Caleb needed space. Caleb needed birthdays. The words poured out, harsh and full. Honest. I didn't hold back. Then I read it back once, twice, and deleted the whole thing. Not because it wasn't true, but because I didn't want to explain myself anymore. I didn't want to convince anyone of my worth. I didn't want the last word. I wanted something quieter than that. I opened my laptop, found the keynote draft for the nonprofit summit, and added one more paragraph near the end, sometimes the loudest. Work is done by the quietest people, not because they have nothing to say, but because they've had to learn how to survive without applause. I saved the draft and sent it to the organizers. Then I closed everything, tabs, messages, notifications, and stepped outside. The air smelled like rain. The streetlights hummed. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to be understood by anyone who had refused to try. The summit was held in a renovated community center, exposed brick, folding chairs. Humming projectors, there were about 100 people. In the room, maybe more, most of them were educators, nonprofit workers, young organizers in thrifted blazers. The kind of people who knew how to build something from almost nothing. I stood behind the podium and adjusted the mic for a second. My voice caught, not from nerves, but from the sudden awareness that this was the first time I'd ever been asked to speak. Without having to prove I belonged there first, I started with data, graphs, comparisons. The usual, but halfway through I shifted. I told them about the stage. The one I walked across alone. I said no one clapped, but I smiled anyway. A few people in the front row leaned forward. Then I added, "This is for anyone who's ever had to clap for themselves." Silence at first. Then hands, then the kind of applause that rises slowly and doesn't stop right away. Afterwards, people came up to me. A woman in her 60s hugged me tight and whispered, "I wish I'd heard this 20 years ago." A teenager with green hair handed me a note that simply read, "You made space I didn't know I needed." Later that night, a clip from the speech was posted online. I didn't know until Mira texted me, "You're everywhere." Thousands of shares, comments. From strangers, this voice, this truth, and somewhere buried in the mix, a message from my father. "Your mom and I saw the video. You should have told us you were speaking." I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on my porch, cup of tea in hand, and let the screen go dim in my lap, the words, the room, the moment they were mine. And for once, that was enough. I called it the Quiet Start Fund. A small mentorship program with seed funding from my fellowship and a matching grant from a partner nonprofit. It was designed for first-gen college students who, like me, didn't know how to ask for help or whom to ask. I mailed my former statistics professor the day we launched. He replied in under an hour and donated $500. In his note, he wrote, "You always saw the patterns before the rest of us." I read it twice. Mentors began to reach out, some from the summit, others I'd never met, a retired counselor, a young teacher from Chicago, a woman who used to work at a shelter and now ran coding workshops on weekends. We built something, week by week, with no headlines this time, just quiet, steady work. On the third week, a letter arrived, handwritten, soft pink envelope with no return address. It was from my mother. The handwriting hadn't changed. Inside, "Proud of you, always." That was it. No date, no apology, no mention of the years in between. I turned it over in my hand, waiting to feel something, waiting for a tug, but it didn't come. So I set it gently beside the recycling bin, not in it, but near enough that I wouldn't see it again unless I chose to dot. Later that day, I met with our first cohort of mentees on Zoom. We talked about FAFSA forms, imposter syndrome, cheap meal prep hacks. One of them, a girl named Justine, stayed behind after the other signed off. "I didn't think someone like you would get it," she said quietly, "but now I think maybe I can." I smiled and told her that's the whole point. That night, I made a list of things I wanted to build next. No mentions of reconnection, no imaginary calls from home. Just plans. Not every table needs to be shared. Some are built for new voices, with chairs pulled out on purpose. The door to the new office had my name on it, painted, not printed. Maria Mora, Director, Equity Data Initiative. I ran my fingers lightly over the plaque before stepping inside. The room was still, settling in half-unpacked boxes, a few framed photos waiting for nails. But the center wall was already finished, whitewashed brick. And hanging there in a black frame was the article title that changed everything. She did it anyway. The team had surprised me with it. At the welcome meeting, they stood in a semicircle, clapping. Someone handed me a mug with my own quote printed on it, "To anyone who had to clap for themselves." I smiled and tucked it next to the stack of notebooks on my desk. I wasn't used to this being seen, expected, valued, but I didn't flinch from it either. I spent most of that first week listening, learning names, ideas, rhythms. The work was national now. Bigger in scale, but rooted in the same truth, Dada could tell the story others chose to ignore. On Friday, after everyone left, I stayed behind, turned off the main lights. Let the city hum outside the window. The office smelled like fresh paint and strong coffee. The good kind, the kind you buy for people you want to keep. I sat down, opened my journal, the one I used to call What They Don't Know I've Survived. Now it had a new title, What I'm Building Without Permission. I wrote a single sentence. This time I am the headline. Then I whispered into the empty room. Not bitter, not broken, just steady. I'm not waiting for them anymore. They missed the first chapter. I'm writing the rest without them.